All right. I'm going to call the meeting to order. A meeting of Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, Tuesday, September 16th, 2025, at 7 p.m. in the Automatic Chamber, and duly noticed in two places, including the city's website, in accordance with the requirements of RSA 91A. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran, Jr. Chair.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govea, Vice Chair.
Here.
We have 5. We also have Planning Manager Sam Durfee and Director Matt Sullivan's on Zoom.
Great. And before we... Oh, I'm sorry.
And Alderman Clee is also here. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And what we will do first is call for public comment. I see no one here from the public. So we'll move on to presentations. Manager Durfee, would you like to come and start your presentation? You have this? Do you need this?
I would like that, thank you.
All right. Take it away.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of Nashua's most esteemed Aldermanic Committee. Thank you very much for having me back. This is our, I believe, 6th session on the code. I appreciate your stamina and willingness to sit through multiple zoning and land use presentations. Hopefully that this has been a positive exercise for everyone as we slowly digest various elements of the code. I think that you all probably appreciate how dense and how much there is to cover through land use regulations. So tonight's topics are going to be the zoning map, as well as talking about green score. But just as a little refresher, how far we've come. We began these back with just a general introduction in October. We got into building types and density earlier this year, kind of building on incrementally, from the building blocks of the code, how it functions, and then the various pieces that come together and play through the whole development process, really. And I chose these two topics for this evening. Slightly unrelated topics. The zoning map is important because we've had multiple opportunities to engage with the public, as well as property owners, developers, and other individuals who have time to look at the zoning map and have had questions, comments, concerns, and we've had very fruitful discussions. And overall, we've come away with the impression that it's fairly accurate with how we've zoned things, but we've had a little tweaks along the way. So I can talk about some of those this evening. Green score, as well as use table and site standards, which we'll do in 2 weeks' time. Much more focused around the development side of things, site specific. So I guess tonight's a little bit a mix of macro and micro, if you will. So without further ado, let's get right into the zoning map. Oops. All right. So why are we updating the zoning map? I'm sure I've been quoted in multiple public meetings, or at least there's evidence of me saying so in the recordings, that our current zoning map is kind of a patchwork. It was originally developed, I believe, in 2008, and then through multiple zoning ordinance changes, map changes, it's evolved. And in some ways, we're trying to play catch up with kind of modern times, if you will, where we've done a lot of expansion of the MU overlay, which the planning board enjoys a large amount of flexibility afforded to it in that overlay, and we've expanded that in multiple areas of the city. Now, that's great. We do love that flexibility at the planning board, but at the same time, it begins to paint another picture of, well, it seems like the rest of the zoning map just is in dire need of an update. And for some data points behind that, you'll see in the third bullet point, higher caseload at the zoning board than the planning board. This has been a recurring trend for a couple of years now, where our zoning board cases are longer than our agendas are longer than our planning board agendas. And the reason being, when you go to the zoning board, you're seeking relief from regulations in one way or another. we have more people who want to do relatively smaller things. You know, it could be home additions, be it an ADU, be it a deck, something like that, where there's relief needed because while what they may be proposing is totally within character with the neighborhood, there is conflict between the character of their neighborhood, their property, and the district that they're in, be it setbacks or maybe it's a density variance, you know, things like that. And when we see a higher volume at the zoning board than the planning board, we're doing more work and granting relief than actually building under the code. So that's an indication that our code needs to evolve and change with the times. And a big part of that is the zoning map. Another word you'll see in here a fair bit just in these bullet points is conformity. So when we talk about zoning board relief, you're addressing, you know, non-conformities in a way. When someone wants to do something that is essentially would render the addition or what have you in contrast with the requirements and design standards of the zoning ordinance, that is, you know, a non-conformity. So we're trying to bring a lot of our historic and older neighborhoods into conformity, and I have a couple of maps that kind of illustrate the degree of which nonconformities exist. So this is on Amherst Street, just to the northwest of its intersection with Main Street. So any lot that has that diagonal hash on it is nonconformity, and this is looking at densities. So you'll see that area that is kind of outlined in red on Main Street with Thayer Court and Clinton Street. So that's the downtown district. That has no density maximum. So obviously those lots are all conforming. But as you get out of that into the RB and the RC, the majority of lots are non-conforming with respect to density. This trend is repeated in this area of the Tree Streets, so between West Hollis and Kinsley, very close to Main Street. Almost all of these parcels are non-conforming with respect to density.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Can I
of course.
stop and ask a question while we have that up? And I don't mean to interrupt.
No, please do.
But did we? So I think I was on the board back then, but I don't know that I asked the question, or I think it was being developed before I took office. But did we just make the map so that all these things would be non-conforming? Because these neighborhoods are hundreds of years old.
It's a really good question. I can only guess, but I would suggest that the district standards were created without doing a very detailed analysis of what is on the ground.
Okay.
I think a very general statement. I don't want to characterize the efforts much, but I mean that's kind of evident, right? You know, I wouldn't say that, you know, the districts were created and with a strong eye towards, you know, what's on the ground, and then this neighborhood just matured and got more dense between that time and now. I think that's
In the last 20 years, I don't think the neighborhoods had that much growth where we're looking.
I think you'd be accurate in saying that. So we did these maps, my staff did these maps very early in the process to get a sense of, you know, how off are we right now? And so a map like this, I think, is very telling. We looked at all sorts of dimensional regulations. Here's that same neighborhood. This is lot size. Red is non-conforming, green is conforming. And we looked at front setbacks. Red is not, I mean, and when you think about lot size and setbacks, those are really key features of character. It's how the building relates to the street and the buildings around it. So when we're talking about a form-based code, these sorts of metrics really set the tone for the neighborhood character. And when, I mean, I'm sure you've all been through the Tree Streets at one point or another, there is a very clear character and rhythm of houses on lots. And this map says that that's wrong. I mean, character is what it is, right or wrong. I mean, it's totally subjective, but when there's such a established character, I would argue that it's not the neighborhood that is wrong, it's just zoned incorrectly for what is actually there. So these are the sorts of things that we wanted to correct with this zoning map.
Okay.
Alderman Jetting, then Alderman Govea.
So, following up on that, am I misunderstanding? Are you saying that, like the neighborhood that you've got pictured here? So at some point in time, those houses were built. I'm assuming there were zoning regulations at the time, and they were
Maybe.
they were built according to the regulations. Are you saying that we've changed the regulations
In
to
all,
make them non-conforming?
I would say in all likelihood, this part of the city as well as others developed before the city had zoning. And then we went in and drew districts, established standards, and I don't think there was a lot of attention paid to what was on the ground. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot easier now when you have street view and aerial imagery, remote sensing, things that you can very quickly do this analysis. I mean, we did this only in a couple of hours to get a sense of this, and that then can inform a more accurate zoning map, but it's a lot easier when you don't have those tools just to draw the boxes and say, okay, here's the setback, here's the lot size. And when you don't do the work of being in the neighborhood and really seeing what is there on the ground, you create situations like this.
Follow up?
I mean, I don't want to derail your presentation.
Please do.
here, and I don't want to take up your time on something. But, I mean, there was a time when, when houses were built too close together, and we had a lot of fires.
Yep.
And someone said, hey, it'd be better if the houses were farther apart so that they wouldn't all catch on fire like this. I mean, one house burns, but when you're all on top of one another, like I'm thinking of the Crown Hill fire, that began at the Nashua River and went all the way out close to the country club, because the embers just kept blowing and the next house would catch on fire. So, I'm thinking that there were probably reasons, and the other thing is the people didn't have automobiles, and so you didn't need driveways and garages and stuff, and so that I can see that in an effort to try to correct a difficult situation, they said, hey, from now on, you gotta, keep these houses farther apart, so that, the setback requirements were instituted. I mean, I don't know if that has anything to do with what, all of these lots now being non-conforming, but it's just, the thought crosses my mind.
No, it's a great thought. I think it'd be fair to say that a lot of zoning regulations are born out of life safety concerns. You think about Euclidean zoning where you have a separation of uses, industrial versus residential. I think that's a generally accepted separation of uses, separation of buildings from your perspective with the fire concerns, completely valid, and that's been used as justification in the past to defend setbacks and other dimensional regulations. Times change, technology changes, firefighting capabilities, building safety, building codes have evolved to make buildings safer. When buildings undergo renovation, there's certain thresholds in which certain actions need to be taken. There's certain densities at which you need to install sprinkler systems. Now, all of those things come into play, and as neighborhoods mature and there's reinvestment, things ideally would create buildings, and buildings would become more safe over time. But the question, I think there was a question asked a few sessions ago, what happens if it was, Alderman Clemens, it was your question relative, I believe, to the California fires. These houses all burn down, or one of them burns down. Now, let's take that scenario right here and, pick the lot between, or a lot between Vine, Buck, and I believe that might be Pine or Palm, any of those, where it's just this big red block right there. Take any one of those houses out due to, a natural disaster. Can they rebuild? Under today's zoning, despite the whole nonconformity clause, right? You would say, well, you have to build to zoning. okay, assuming that you can actually fit a house on the lot with what's left with current setbacks, that house would stick out like a sore thumb because it would not match the character and the rhythm of the neighborhood. Now, assuming life safety standards are all met, is it better to have a house that fits with the character or fits the regulations? You know, I think that's a subjective question and open to interpretation, but this map, the goal of this was to kind of highlight, you know, the discrepancies between current character and the regulations.
Thank you.
Alderman Govea?
Thank you. So I guess my question is, in just really simple terms for me, conforming and non-conforming. What's non-conforming, what's conforming?
So if something is conforming, it meets all the regulations. If it's non-conforming, it does not meet one or more of the regulations.
So they had a variance of some sort to build, or is it just grandfathered in from, okay.
That would be a term, right? So, you know, it was established before either the regulations were in place or it was conforming with the regulations when it was built. The regulations then changed, and now you have a legal nonconformity.
Okay.
A nonconformity section of the land use code is a very common thing, especially in older parts of the country. New England's a great example, where you have very old housing stock. A lot of development occurred before zoning came into play, and we run into this all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, these houses, these lots are over 100 years old by far.
Oh, yes.
So there was no zoning at the time these things got built, and that's why they are the way they are. How much of this do you want to change? Like, are you looking to get all those houses in green, or part of them in green, or like, what's the total thing? I mean, I guess maybe you're going to be telling us that, but.
I will. I mean, thank you for the segue. I greatly
Okay,
appreciate that.
cool.
As we'll see, and you have the controls to go into the next, we opened up the zoning map in another window. But basically, and feel free to zoom into the Tree Street neighborhood. So the idea is, it's very difficult to make everything conforming. You're gonna have really unique lots that are severely undersized. You wanna try and get a majority. I mean, we were targeting, 70% or more of lots in a given area should be conforming. So that's really the goal. But what we found is, especially in the Tree Streets, in other similar, relatively dense neighborhoods, there is a general rhythm, a general character, and if we can get those standards more or less right, that will automatically bring most of the buildings and the lots in that area into conformity with the new regulations. So as you can see here in the Tree Streets, a lot of these lots fit the standards associated with our urban residential district. So that will give you a picture. I mean, we haven't then done a follow-up analysis, and we certainly could, is update that map that we just saw to reflect the standards in urban residential. We tested a couple of areas, and it seems to work very well.
I don't think that's the same area.
No, it's Otterson Street and Prospect
Oh,
Avenue.
okay.
It's more this way. You gotta go over here.
Walnut, there's Chestnut,
There you go.
Vine, where were we? Ash.
Right there, but up.
Up
Yeah,
a
a
little
little
bit, yeah.
A
north.
little bit more.
Look for this church. Yeah,
Yep.
there it is. The
Right in
church
there.
is right there. St. Louis.
Yep.
I'm still not taking yours.
And so, I'm actually,
You're good to zoom out a little bit more.
if I could ask if we zoom out a little bit, and not a whole lot, one thing I do want to point out is the granularity of this zoning map. We really went on a parcel by parcel basis. You get a general character of a neighborhood, but then you have a couple of buildings that either are a lot taller or a lot more dense. Oh, thank you. And for those reasons, or the building is just a completely different architectural type and carries a lot other, dimensional characteristics with it that just, you can't fit it into the zoning district for the rest of the area. So you begin to have some, you begin to have some variation, especially in, areas of the city that you do have larger buildings. So I think this paints a really good example of where on these larger parcels with larger buildings, it is almost on a parcel by parcel basis to make sure that the district accommodates what is on the parcel. And the idea being that we want to capture what's there, render it conforming, and then basically allow for the next appropriate increment of growth. So can be a kind of a free-form part of the presentation, where if you have a specific area in mind, we can go take a look at, we can toggle between proposed districts, existing districts,
Alderman Clee.
all that.
Thank you, and I apologize. I had to leave to help the residents, so if this question's already been asked, I apologize. But when you're talking about this conforming and non-conforming, and you were just talking about that large parcel, and you were saying that you would want to render it to be conforming so that as things change, then you would have that growth and so on. Without you having to go through everything you probably already explained, how do you take all of these very small non-conforming that are non-conforming in so many different ways without creating this just massive anything goes?
Right, so I think the qualifier there is the next appropriate increment of growth. And now in some cases, there is no additional appropriate level of growth where the building takes up so much of the lot you can't add on to it. There is a natural neighborhood character basis for kind of a ceiling on that growth, and that's okay. I think that when we had talked through the redevelopment overlay districts a few sessions ago, the master plan had identified a few areas of the city where the community wanted to see growth, and that's in the downtown core, East Hollis Street area, Daniel Webster Highway, and the Amherst Street corridor. And so we set these overlay districts accordingly, and just to give us a sense of where those are, so these are the overlay areas. And without going into too much detail of how that whole process works, basically these are opportunities to upzone. You opt into them, and then a developer will be subject to inclusionary zoning, but basically they get a greater level of density, they get more intense building types. So it's a give and take. It's incentive driven. But so you'll see where those are, and then even I'd say around the areas around those overlay districts, the base districts are more or less reflective of what is there. And as you kind of pull away from the main corridors of the city as well as the downtown core, as you kind of radiate outwards, and I'm really thinking more as you get further into the southwest quadrant, that is newer development that occurred when zoning was in place. We see much higher levels of conformity in those areas because it was developed under zoning, and the zoning in that area hasn't really changed much. I mean, you can also observe that there's a very strong and consistent character in French Hill. There's also a very strong and consistent, very different character in the Cherrywood neighborhood, for example. Point is, the zoning regulations, or in some cases in the older neighborhoods, the original lack thereof led to a specific type of character. Now, the base that we're proposing in this scheme here, we kind of be representative of that, so that if anyone wanted to continue and build in those areas where there were lots available, they would continue to replicate the character. That's kind of one of the selling points of the form-based code, where, okay, well, I know there's this vacant lot next to me, I don't really know what it's gonna do. Well, with this, you can have a level of predictability as a resident that what is going to be built isn't going to be wildly out of character with the area.
I have a question.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
just,
Yep, go ahead.
I guess, maybe I'm missing the point here. I hear everything that you're saying, but my only concern is that if we broaden it too much, do we leave, do we allow, similar to overlay, in other words, that we could potentially have, I don't want to see what I've seen like on Amherst Street happen into a residential area where you've got like a business that can be in with a residential area, and that we in fact do have an overlay area that we start to lose that characteristic of the neighborhood.
So you're
That's not going to happen with this, is what you say, right?
correct. So it seems like you're getting at a potential broadening of uses.
Yes.
An increase in use intensity or building
Yes.
mass intensity,
Right.
things like, right, no, so this code really is trying to do a very detailed and granular job of identifying the character and the uses in the existing area and drafting regulations that respect those and keep those and perpetuate those characteristics and standards in most of the city.
Just one quick follow-up. So there wouldn't be a forcing of density in a larger region then?
No, so the
Okay.
only way
That's
that.
the other question that I would
So the
have.
only way that happens is really through the overlays.
Okay.
And those are strategically located based on, input from the master plan.
Thank you.
No problem. And my question is somewhat related, because I think about Hudson and their golf course dilemma. What would our current proposed plan do to protect, let's say, Ward 7 from the golf course being turned into hundreds of homes or industrial space?
Oh, it's
How do we conserve, wetlands, stuff like, how do you not just maintain the character, but also protect the environment?
Sure, so there is a level of environmental regulations that are basically on top of the districts, right? So we currently have setbacks to wetlands development. There are state standards. The city has additional standards on top of those. So that is going to be carried over, and that will remain in effect, absolutely. And I think that is one of the things that we also heard a lot from public input. So how do we have more trees? How do we protect the environment? How do we have more green space and open space? Through as other areas of the city redevelop. And actually, that's a really good segue into Green Score, which we don't have to go there quite yet. But you'll then see through there how developers can get credit for being good stewards of the environment through intentional landscaping and how they manage their stormwater runoff.
And is there anything preventing someone from buying one of those golf courses and turning it into a tar pit or whatever?
Chinese water company.
That too.
The private market is a very powerful force. But that aside, we have obviously if we want to use the Nashua Country Club as an example. So it's R9, so you could potentially see the perpetuation of character like this. I highly doubt that the Nashua Country Club would sell to a private developer to create a residential subdivision. That said, though, the private market can be a fickle creature and can turn on a dime.
But R9 doesn't permit industrial use?
No,
I
very,
think
very much not.
Okay, all right.
Exactly.
Go. Alderman T.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chair, whatever you want to be. So it's funny, you said something about people want more green space, but on the flip side of here, people want more housing.
Yeah, yeah.
So how are you balancing that? Because Nashua doesn't have a lot of room now.
Yeah.
You would have to take over green space unless you do the density thing, right? So, I mean, how do you balance that? Because, we're losing green space but yet we need more housing. Like, how is that going to be balanced in this new code?
So we explored different ways of approaching that. So when you think of green space or open space, it can be a park. It can also just be a little space for you. It could be a balcony, your own piece of the outside, if you will. Obviously, parks and balconies, incredibly different scales, but appropriate in different contexts. So if you look at the high street flats, I think they're Juliet balconies, but if you had a real balcony, that's 20 square feet or so of space. You could have, flower boxes. You can create yourself a little oasis right in the middle of the city. That said, we do have standards particularly in the redevelopment overlays, where if you have control over 30 acres, big box store turns over, and this is your opportunity to really create, potentially hundreds of units of residential, maybe a mix of uses, retail and consumables, restaurants and coffee shops and the like. There is opportunity there with that much space to create new pocket parks, more, on the ground, what you would think of typically as open recreational, passive recreational space. And that's all tied into those redevelopment overlay standards where that's a requirement because you've opted into this overlay that lets you do all sorts of things. You are going to have to deliver affordable housing. You are going to have to deliver green space in a thoughtfully planned out, connected neighborhood.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Can you go back to like Main Street downtown?
Sure. Anywhere in
Can you-
particular?
Yeah, that's fine right there. Can you describe for me again the difference between mid-rise 3, 4, and 5?
Number of stories. 3, 4, and 5 stories.
So is 5 our maximum? Is that what we're saying in when we say mid-rise 5?
Exactly, yep.
So I guess just a pine here that I have a concern about that.
Sure.
And my concern is that we want to be, my opinion, we want to be encouraging growth beyond 5 stories tall. So by putting in something that says mid-rise 5, okay, so a developer will come in and build something 5. But there's nothing to incentivize them to build higher, is there?
The redevelopment overlays. So let me turn off the base so you can actually see. So in this area, we saw some mid-rise 5. This here is urban core. Urban core allows up to 7 stories. We recognize that there is there's a market dynamic associated with cost of construction in different building codes. You're only reaching 7 stories basically on a 1 level of podium parking and then 6 of stick built. Beyond that, the only way you're getting higher is additional levels of steel and concrete podium.
Yeah.
You're not going to go from stick to structural steel in the Nashua market, rents drive what you can do for construction. You aren't going to see anything more than 7 or 8 stories, again, driven by podium heights, until you start allowing 20-story buildings, because the economics don't really pencil out until you can get so much density that it actually justifies under the Nashua rent environment. You need to go much higher in order to get the scale to justify the cost of switching to structural steel.
So how do we do that?
We either raise rents or we allow 20 stories, which we do under the urban core station, which this is a setup for.
Well, you do allow it under the urban core.
So if and when we have a rail station, the land values
Yes.
will rise so dramatically. We're basically setting up ourselves from a regulatory standpoint to be ready when that happens. Right now, though, even if you pick the most valuable piece of real estate and we allow 22, 25 stories, I don't believe the market can really support it at this time.
No, I know that the market is not ready for that. I'm under no illusion that it could be, but I do think that, we want to keep an eye to the future. We don't want to do this every year, right? I mean, this isn't an exercise. Granted, you have to go back and you have to look, times change, things like that, but I think that we want to be ready for something like that. We want to be ready for somebody who surprises us and says, I do want to do something like this. Yep. So, is what you're telling me that anything that says urban is kind of, would be allowed to do something along those lines?
I can check exactly. So urban core station area, that is the most intense. That does allow up to 22 stories. Urban mill, I believe, is 10. That's reflective of some of our current mill buildings, where, you know, you're building with brick. It's a very different construction medium, and you could go that high. That's more just to render things, existing buildings conforming. I don't think we'd see the same development pattern, but it does lay out form standards should someone wish to replicate it, albeit with a different structural medium. Again, this is in respect to, you know, the form-based character and perpetuating a built form. But so your comment about, you know, looking towards the future, I'd be very hesitant to say that this code itself is future-proof, but the structure behind it, you know, how we're treating districts and how we're mapping them can be very fluid as market dynamics change in the future. And we've had a number of conversations with developers who are looking at potential projects in some of these redevelopment overlay areas, and they say, hey, that mid-rise number you have right there, that's not tall enough for us. And it's not going from, you know, 3 to 6, it's going from 6 to 7. You know, it's just a little shift, but at that scale, and when, if you're talking about a large parcel, multiple buildings, that additional floor can make the difference. But those are the conversations we need to be having now.
Well, yeah, because I'm thinking like, you know, and again, this could be a pie in the sky, right? But we need more parking downtown, right? So if we partner with somebody to build a parking garage, and it's 5 stories tall, but then it's on top of that, there's another 5 stories of housing or something along those lines, right? And it's half and half, like half to the public, half to the whatever. Like, my point is, I agree, I don't think that these mid-rise, I don't think it's tall enough. I think we really need to think about that, particularly in the downtown area. And really, like, if you think about it too, like up off of, we already have some 9, 10-story buildings off of Exit 8. You know, so I just, in my opinion, that is not enough.
It does kind of constrict us to just have those condos that are really hotel rooms type of developments, kind of thing. But Alderman Clee.
Thank you. When we're talking about the mid-rise 5 in the downtown area, I don't know why my memory is telling me that in the downtown area, the first floor is usually always like businesses, and the second floor is business, and then the third floor becomes residential. Is that correct? We don't put residential on the first floor?
Correct, yeah. In our current code, it's, you know, some sort of retail or commercial use.
Right.
Yep.
So that's the first 2 floors, which means if we go to 7, we only still have 4 floors of residential within that.
Yep.
So we're still handicapping ourselves to not being able to take full advantage. And if we can't sell the retail space, is the zoning considering changing any of that? Or is that going to stay the way it is?
Yes, so we are taking a hard look at that. And, you know, some of the projects we've seen approved in the downtown area recently have needed relief because they're going for a podium-style development, and, you know, private parking doesn't qualify as, you know, a retail or a commercial use. Now, if they had, say, you know, wrapped the building in a commercial storefront, one that actually functions, you know, maybe it's 20, 30 feet deep, you still activate the front of that building, that's totally passable, but it is masking a parking structure. Alderman Clements, your earlier point about, you know, 5 levels of parking with 5 on top, you know, we've had conversations with developers about something very similar, where we are, you know, floating this idea of a public-private partnership to address some of our parking shortcomings in the downtown area. A wrap is more of a feasible construction type. My understanding from hearing from these developers and engineers is that podium style, especially with multiple levels of podium, is less feasible than building a standalone parking structure and then wrapping it. There's, for various reasons, structural concerns and building codes that go into the podium, and a wrapped structure makes more sense. That's not to say it's impossible. I think that a 5-story podium with 5 levels of residential on top is probably not likely in our market, which is okay, because this wrapped form is actually, I think, more of an urbanist sort of environment and building typology, where while you have a massive parking reservoir on a city block, you still have apartments and you still have commercial space that's fronting the street. You know, the block becomes much more activated rather than just, you know, the Elm Street parking garage. It's the Elm Street parking garage with residences and commercial activity all around it.
Just, could you define wrapped? And podium?
Yeah, so podium is when you have just parking structure and then residential on top of it.
Okay.
Wrapped is when you have a core of parking, and then all along the outside for a depth of 30 to 40, sometimes as low as 20 feet, there's commercial and residential all the way around that parking structure. So it wraps it, it shields it, and you know, the parking structure itself is not visible to the public, and rather it's that more activated, you know, windows and balconies and commercial storefronts.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Clements.
Yeah, and I understand, I get that, but again, it doesn't, that's today, right? And it doesn't leave open the ability to do something different if we wanted to. And in particular, because the city follows its own codes.
Right.
You know, so even if it was built on something that was city property, we'd still have to follow our own, we'd still have to follow this. And if we could cajole somebody into doing something that we wanted, then,
Yep.
you know. So I guess my point is, you know, I would want to see this adjusted. And can you go to exit 8
Sure.
to where like the glass building is?
Yep. I believe that
Used to
is.
call it the Coca-Cola building.
Are
you thinking,
you're there.
Right there, Kessler Farm Drive, Somerset.
It's in
Yep, that's the
Trafalgar
one.
Square.
Yeah, right.
Right in this area.
Yeah, so what do we have that as on the,
In the base, we have the overlays on right now.
okay,
So that is a mid-rise neighborhood district group. So in the downtown core, you saw was effectively straight up zoning into a higher level district. District groups exist where, unlike downtown, where you have an already very strong neighborhood fabric, the upzoning approach there was really to be respectful of the goal of increasing density and intensity, but with a nod to what's already in the area. On the corridors, Amherst and Daniel Webster Highway, these are basically kind of retail conversions. And so when you do something like that, you have no neighborhood fabric, so to speak, to lean on. So the district groups, there's a matrix in the code where the mid-rise district group gives you basically a number of districts to choose from. I believe they range from urban residential all the way up to mid-rise 5 or mid-rise 6. And there's a requirement that you basically create your own zoning map, if you will, within your development footprint, where you have a mix of those districts. And the reason being is you don't get all of the most intense, but you don't have to do all of the least intense. You create this dynamic site where you have variability in building heights, and you kind of create this more mixed use sort of and mixed feel neighborhood development where you have different housing typologies, you have different price points. It's not just all the same building at the same height.
Well, I have Alderman Jettie too on this.
so this is the overlay. Can you
Yes.
look at the actual,
The base. So commercial, industrial, commercial business, some mid-rise 4.
So it's interesting that, like, most of that is commercial industrial right now, but on the overlay, it's residential.
Not quite. So the mid-rise, those are offering building typologies. So, you know, a mid-rise 4, mid-rise 6 building could be a general building. These larger buildings are relatively use agnostic. So you can have an office building, and it can be a general building. You can have a general building that has commercial on the first floor and then residential on the next 5 floors. It's much more, this is where we talk about the form-based code. It's much more dealing with the appearance of the building, its relationship to the buildings and around it and the street, and, you know, the provision of green space, and less about the uses that are in it. Obviously, you know, with respect to those more potential, like, noxious uses, you don't want to have those associated with the residential. So when you go from commercial industrial to a mid-rise neighborhood, you do have a use switch.
So that's my question. So you could, theoretically, you could have, you know, an office building next to a apartment building, I guess, in this particular area.
You could do that right now in many parts of the city.
So what is the height requirement up here? Or what restriction, I should say,
Currently or in the proposed?
in the proposed?
In the proposed, commercial industrial, I believe, is up to 2 or 3 stories depending on the type of building. But then into, you know, the mid-rise neighborhood district group, I believe it's up to 6.
Okay. I guess I don't, again, I'm gonna just point this out, I guess I don't understand that, because there's buildings up there now that are 9 stories tall, and that's what's there.
Right.
Like, and I'm thinking of, like, the hotel is one of them, the glass building is the other one.
Let me rephrase that slightly. So the commercial industrial district has a number of building types that are permitted. The building types are really what set the maximum and minimum floor requirements. So something like a hotel could be considered like a point tower or a block building within the code, you know, as a building typology. And then those have various, I'm looking through it right now to give you an exact answer, various height requirements, which then can be further augmented by the district that they're in. But, you know, with the idea of we don't want to render anything non-conforming from a height standpoint, I think those are sorts of things where we go and we look at the tallest buildings in various parts of the city, like, okay, well, let's check that in, you know, the proposed base code and understand, okay, look, we may need to adjust building heights to ensure that those are conforming.
I think I understood what you're saying. I guess my point is, my overall concern here is that we need to allow for these, we need to allow for greater height, in my opinion, that we're restricting it too much. And my theory behind that is that if we let them go, not everywhere, obviously not everywhere, but like, you know, here, downtown, over where maybe that commuter rail station is, maybe the Daniel Webster Highway corridor as well. If we allow them to go higher, and they don't, that's fine, right? But if we don't allow them to go higher and they want to, that's a problem.
Yes.
So my thought is we should do this map the way that we want to see it, and then if it comes back where most of the development that comes in, they're 8 stories, well, not even, they're 6 stories, 3 stories, whatever. No harm, no foul. We want the development. We want the conversation to go forward. So that's just one alderman's opinion, but that's how I'd like to see this constructed.
Thank you.
Alderman Jettie, then Alderman Govea.
The truth is, you know, if somebody came to us and said, you know, we want to build a 20-story building where the commuter rail station is going to go. I mean, we could always rezone that area to allow that. The advantage of what you're proposing is that we identify ahead of time, proper planning is we tell them or tell the public, if you're thinking about a big building like this is where, we would agree, this is where you could do it. So that has an advantage, but to say that, if somebody came up, like I'm thinking, Riviera University wants to build a 20-story dormitory, they got a big influx of students and they want to, we could always rezone, part of South Main Street to do that if we wanted to. But, what you're advocating is proper planning ahead of time, identifying the areas. But if somebody had a proposal for something that we hadn't identified ahead of time, we can always rezone if it was a good enough proposal, a good enough deal, and something we wanted. But could you tell me, are there any residential areas, like, I don't know what the residential areas are, R9, R30, R40, those the three? Are any of those, have you identified any of those areas that you're planning on changing?
So largely the R districts, so R75 is new, that's the, I guess, highest density R district. R75 was developed because we have a lot of residential lots that are 7,500 square feet. That's where the 7.5 comes from. That's the same scheme with R9. Those are 9,000 square foot lots, R18, 30, so on and so forth. Largely speaking, anything that is R dash number already exists in the current code and we're not touching it. The neighborhood residential, which is the next most dense from R75, largely already exists today. We're not really touching it. Urban residential gets really interesting because you start to have a blend of uses where you have kind of those neighborhood corner stores. That's a very interesting district. That's really kind of an urban transitional district. But in terms of R40, R30, those boundaries were largely ported over from the old code into what we're proposing because a lot of those areas were developed after zoning was already in effect in this city. A lot of high levels of conformity under the current code. If it's not broke, don't fix it, in a way. And also we recognize there is so much pride in the character of those districts and there's very little to be gained in terms of growth opportunity, that the fight that would be had to turn those R30, R40s into urban core would be so great, the juice wouldn't be worth the squeeze. So we recognize we took a cue from the master plan. Hey, these are the areas to focus growth. We'll run with that, and we'll also preserve the character of the more rural parts of the city, because that's important too.
Where's the new R75 going into? What part of the city?
Yeah, so
And
there's,
what was it before?
I believe this would have been RB, a mix of RB, RA.
What ward is that?
I believe that is,
Two
part of
and
that is
three.
3 and 2.
3 and 2. And what was it before? I'm sorry.
It's probably RB, actually, I can tell you, we got that layer right here.
And it's probably right around Amherst Street, right? Is that where it is?
Let's see. So this was, yep, so largely RA.
All right.
Yep, so that was all RA. So R75 is pretty much RA.
The wards 2 and 3.
Yep.
Is going to have more density allowed?
No, it's about the same.
About the
Yeah.
same?
It's about the same.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. So you just created that based on the lot sizes that are?
We create it based on the character.
Okay.
Right?
It's
So the
equivalent
idea
of
is,
0.15 acres, right?
All right.
Yeah.
the idea is just higher levels of conformity.
And one last question before I turn it to Alderman Govea. In the business use, business commercial versus, what is permitted in those uses? Because I recall having to get a special permit to provide healthcare and.
Sure. Oh, right.
Is that going to still be something that businesses will have to do?
Ideally not.
Okay.
No, so we do have the use table scheduled for a session on the 29th. So without getting too far into that, we are drastically simplifying our use table. And there's recognition of, there's clearly business commercial uses and there's clearly industrial commercial uses. And so drawing that line in the use table between those intensities and characteristics is important. And then recognizing that there's a lot of very similar uses. We're basically creating use categories. And then when important, kind of defining sub-uses that may have very interesting, unique characteristics to them. But what that allows is, we currently have a use table, I believe is around 300 uses long, many of which we've never seen, never used. The thinking was, oh, well, if it's not defined, it's not permitted. Well, by having these broader categories, it gives staff the flexibility of saying like, oh, well, palmistry, okay, well, maybe that's a personal service use, but we don't necessarily need, palmistry and fortune telling as a use in the use table, which it currently is. That is just a,
Oh, wow.
oh yeah, that was a fun one
Because
to
it used to
find.
be on Amherst Street.
Nice. Get my palms read. Alderman Gobea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with my colleague at large when we're talking about how tall we want buildings to go. And I think that kind of stems, when I'm thinking about it, of if I'm going to bring money here and do a development, and then say I'm looking around, and I don't know, I'm just using Manchester because they're up the highway. And I'm looking at here in Manchester, Manchester says, all right, well, yeah, you could do that. Or we could go to Nashville where we're going to have to go through more bureaucracy. I'm going to pick the path of least resistance. And I'd rather not turn off business and development opportunity by throwing a cap on it. I'd rather let them come to us and have us make that decision. So I actually thought that was a very good point, and I think that would be something I'd like to see as well.
I appreciate that. And so to kind of summarize, it's very clear, as stated in the master plan, that, these are the areas we want to see growth, the broader downtown area and in the major corridors. Would it be fair to summarize that, because we have stated as such, maybe completely removing height restrictions or increasing them? I mean, there's a point where we go so high that's just like, well, the market's going to tell us what it's going to be. But at the same time, we're trying to balance where it's like, do we go? But at the same time, there is a balance being struck because we're doing a geographical basic, constraining of where the height is going to go, and then just saying, okay, height can go here. We don't care how, let the market decide. I mean, that's, I suppose, an approach.
You have a follow-up, then Alderman Clemens and Alderman McLean. Just to add in, I agree with my colleagues from Ward 1 and at large, but I would worry about downtown, and I don't know if maybe it's just I've watched Back to the Future too many times, and the feeding frenzy for casinos in the state of New Hampshire, and what could come about, and that also brings crime and other aspects of it, and how we define what, if we're going to go high, what could actually be a permitted use for going high, because no one wants maybe a hotel with a small casino, that might be great, but do you want downtown to be casino central type of thing? So follow-up, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I mean, me personally, I think I'm a big fan of letting the free market dictate what it wants to do. And I think these developers can run their math and figure it out. We have a housing problem, and when we're talking about the housing side of it, I'll let them tell me. And when we're looking at businesses, bringing businesses in, I'll let them tell me how much room they want, and then we'll figure out a way to house the employees as well. So I think it's all good problems, and I think the market can dictate a lot of it, in my opinion.
Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think, I think in some of these areas, we don't put a height restriction on, and we allow, we do everything else, right? We do everything else. And then that's not to say we don't want height restrictions, obviously, like in an R9, we want height restrictions. It's more of those core areas that were pointed out you know, the purple areas, if you will,
Yep.
and then also in the middle of the city downtown.
Yep.
Alderman
Yeah,
Cole?
Are you finished?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. A couple of things. I'm going to stick with the height thing at first. While I agree with both of my colleagues, I'm saying 100%, and then I'm going to contradict myself, but I do. I really do agree with them. My only concern, especially as someone who sits on the planning board and listening to residents, is if we put something through like this and suddenly it popped up in an area where a home is, something similar to what's happening over Otterson and so on. We've got this little house and now you've got this thing towering over them. I get a little anxious over something like that, like if suddenly something huge popped up on where the Elm Street, school was, and you've got these houses, and they went all the way to the edge, and now it's blocking out their sun and so on. This is my concern. We suddenly have a 20-story building. If it were along Main Street, I would be 100% on that. So as a person who sits on the planning board, listening to residents who've lived here generation after generation after generation, and now suddenly their tree is no longer going to grow, or that little garden that they couldn't have is not going to be there. I think we need to think forward for that as well. So while, yes, the free market needs to dictate, but we can't let these developers and so on develop out the people who have been here forever. So I want to take that into consideration when we're thinking about this, and we're thinking about this kind of overlaying and doing something. So while, yes, I agree with that, I want to make sure that we're very cognizant of where we're going to allow something like this to happen, so that it can't hit these smaller homes, and that we don't affect that one home that's sitting there and is, we see movies about this, that one little tiny home behind, on New York City between these skyscrapers. I don't want to see something like that here in Nashua.
That kind of is already happening in at Riviera,
Well,
that one house.
it's kind of happening here. It's happening here over in Otterson.
Yeah,
kinda. So, yeah.
And you can see how frustrating that can be.
But can you imagine if now it's a 20-story building?
Right.
Yeah, so versus a 4-story or a 3-story building. So that's just something I want to keep, and I just wanted to say that. There's nothing more to comment on that. But the other thing I had about the urban, and this is probably for the next conversation of the use table meeting that you'll probably be having, my concern about the urban, what do you call it, urban residence type of thing, where they can have the small businesses and so on. I'm already struggling with these illegal businesses that are on like Toll Street and Whitney Street, these automotive businesses where people are working on cars, and we've got oil in the street, and painting and things like that. I don't want to create, and again, that will probably be for your next discussion, I don't want to create a zone that automatically gives people the right to do this without having to get special permissions. So just keeping that in mind while we're creating these kind of zones and so on. So,
I will just, because it'll be quick,
Yeah.
the sorts of uses that are commercial in nature that would be allowed in urban residential are of a nature that would be complementary to the residential character. Corner, like Janot's,
Right.
things like that.
Okay.
Not something like an automotive repair shop. That is a commercial industrial use,
Okay.
and that's where those uses belong.
okay. Thank you so much.
Alderman Tebow and then Alderman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm going to agree with Alderman Clemens and Alderman Gouveia. Let's build up everywhere. I'm good with that. I mean, I've been talking about it since I got here. Let's build up. We're a city, right? Manchester's all built up. They get tall buildings. Why can't we have tall buildings? So let's do it. I don't care where, except not in Ward 8. I mean, I have a hotel. I mean, there's a huge hotel there.
true.
It's a
That's
huge
Right.
building. So, I mean, we do have taller buildings in. There's a lot of room back behind Sheridan, although, my people on the other side of that probably wouldn't like that. So I think we still have to be thoughtful to a degree. We just got to be careful to a degree, but I think we need to get to that point where if the market can deal with it, then we go up. So.
If I can just make a connection between Alderwoman Clee, what you said, and what has been stated here. Right, so the juxtaposition of intensities when they're right next to each other. If you look at this map, And so darker is more intense, right? So if you look at Main Street, there's this, kind of block by block fading of intensity. So the idea would be you build up to 20 stories. You don't go from a 1.5-story bungalow to a 20-story building. You go from that bungalow to maybe, a triplex and then a 6-story and then the 20. That's the approach. We have enough lateral maneuverability within this downtown core to do what we call transect zoning, where you gradually but steadily increase the intensity. I don't think we're going to see a flood of 20-story buildings yet. In the future, we may, but so much so that all of downtown and all of the East Hall Street corridor becomes like that? Probably not, but we want to make sure that those 20-story buildings happen where the land values are the highest. Those are going to be along the corridors, and then that land value will begin to fall off as you get off of those corridors, and there will be a natural market-driven decline in heights to match those land values. And so this code was, we're kind of looking at the market very heavily and trying to really be informed by the market and getting those heights right. I think that the feedback we've heard tonight is very valuable in that, okay, let's push it where we can and really, take the roof off, and whatever comes will come, but then as we taper away from the most intense areas, let's give the neighborhoods a transition.
Alderman Clemens, you're good. Alderman Govea.
Yeah, just quickly, I don't want to keep dragging this conversation out, but I think when we look at these areas that we want to build with no cap, I look around at the ward aldermen here tonight. We all have pretty residential, single-family homes, quarter-acre lots in our wards. Obviously, we all have pockets of higher density. But I think for me, when we're talking about taking off a cap, these are certain areas that we start with. And then if we ever find that we're in the situation where, great, we're capped out on this block, well, then we start growing out slower and slower. I don't necessarily see it as we're going to start putting huge high rises in the middle of Ward 1. I guess potentially it could, but I don't really see it that way. I think this is a kind of a strategic approach at very specific areas of the city where we're looking for this type of development.
Would it be reasonable to ask you to come back with potential language change or presentations to the rest of the committee on certain sections that go up 20, even higher if you think it's practical, in the urban areas that you've identified, the downtown, Spitbrook excluding Ward 8, and Amherst Street exit 8. Anything else that I missed, guys?
I think that would be entirely appropriate, and I think there is, a session dedicated to, we've heard all of this feedback, here's all the changes we've made, because there's stuff around IZ, there's all sorts of pieces we've heard over these sessions, and they all kind of bleed into each other. So we'll think about that, we'll organize it as I'm on paternity leave and I have oodles of time to think about how to strategically
Don't work on your paternity leave.
bring this, it's just going to be like a 2 a.m. fever dream as I'm feeding a young child. It's all going to come to me right then and there, I'm sure. Okay, we can
Move on to green space?
hop into green score. Okay. So this will be a bit more structured for better or for worse. Okay. So green score is really about landscaping, how we're treating stormwater. This is the environmental section of the code. Currently, landscaping is really regulated by frontage, number of units, X number of trees per 40 linear feet of frontage. This is a pretty basic calculation that gets you to how many plantings you have. And we do differentiate between shade trees and ornamental trees. We want some ground cover. It's good. We're getting some green in all of our developments, and we require landscape plans, and it's been effective. I think in a way we've been lacking. We don't really see a lot of green infrastructure, which is really quite interesting. I was in Salem on Friday taking a tour of Tuscan Village, which has been great because I've heard all about it over these years. I've never actually been, and then I got to do a walking tour with the planner and the developer. There were multiple instances of green infrastructure where the best way I can describe it is, think, you have a catch basin on the side of the road. Right now, that might be all you see. It goes into an underground pipe, it's piped away, and, gets treated or not. Good example would be that catch basin dumps into a roadside drainage swale. It falls through and then feeds all sorts of plantings, and there's a lot of infiltration and pre-treatment that occurs. But then there is another drain that in high storm events, that excess water still gets captured and piped away. There's no flooding. But when you're not utilizing that infrastructure, it's being infiltrated, and it's, resulting in green space and more landscaping along the roadways. That's an example of green infrastructure. That is more expensive to do. So how do we incentivize people to do that? We reward it, right? So if your green score is, what we're basically trying to create a way of, it's not just how many trees, we're crediting intentionality behind landscape design and how it interacts with the site, from a functional but also from an aesthetic standpoint. Apologize for the table with a lot of text. But basically, here are the things that we would consider. We're looking at soils. How deep are the soils? That's a reflection of what can grow there and how much water it can absorb. How are we treating the ground? Is it mulch? Is it grass? Is it other organic surfaces that are covering the ground? Plants, are they short? Are they tall? How much carbon sequestration is occurring within the woody matter? How much air filtration? All the ecosystem services that go into landscaping. We're trying to recognize all the elements that would be incorporated into a planting plan and then rewarding them accordingly based on their value. Trees, we recognize small trees, we recognize large trees, preserved trees. I find it really interesting. Where I live next to a subdivision from like the 1970s, and there are these massive 200-year trees all throughout the subdivision. You look at Bartlett Ave, not to call out any particular development, but Juliana Drive, they clear cut the entire area, put up the homes, and then you get these little sticks of trees. It's like, oh man, it'd be really nice if there's some actual trees there. We're incentivizing with rewarding preservation of trees at a higher level than we otherwise would.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I did not see your hand.
That's okay.
Alderman Clemmons.
Can I just stop you there for 1 second?
Certainly.
And I'm gonna point this out because my father-in-law was, rest his soul, was a arborist. And when they built the development behind my house, they left 4 trees. Big tall maples, they're beautiful. He looked at that and he said, that one and that one probably aren't gonna survive. And I said, why is that? And he goes, because although they saved the trees, the landscaping, they paved over here, and the root systems on those trees go down and under. So it was a field before, so all of the water that used to get down into the roots of those trees gets washed away down into the catch basin now. So I'm all for preserving trees, but he was right, and I've got to actually contact them. I've got to contact the property owner because that tree is dying. My wife noticed it the other day, and it's got to be taken down. So I don't want to incentivize that. So does that make sense? Like it has to be. I don't want to just have them say, "Oh, look, we preserve these trees, but they're only going to last for 8 years as they slowly die, and then they're gone anyway."
Right. We want it to work.
Correct.
I'll point your eye to the third and fourth line under soils, where we talk about pervious paving. So when there is, potentially a preserved tree in close proximity to pavement, we would want to see some pervious pavers. And, this really takes a level of expertise, right? We have interest in the staff level to get more familiar with this. It's not only planning, but there would need to be partnership with the engineering department and the parks department. I don't believe we currently have a staff arborist. I've worked in other communities that do have staff arborists, and they provide a lot of value. But there's also a lot that we would need to lean on in the private sector in terms of, a landscape architect coming and presenting their landscape plan and designing it in accordance with these standards, and recognizing, if we are preserving trees, maybe they're a certified arborist, or they have someone on staff, they could speak to those sorts of issues to ensure that, there's no unintended consequences in terms of the landscape design.
Alderman Cleat?
Yeah, piggybacking on what my colleague mentioned about the preserved trees, I have seen when they presented again up in the planning board that they're preserving like 2 feet of trees, but that they're taking down the trees in front of those. And often, and I can speak to that at Greeley, when we lost all those trees at that one development, the trees in Greeley are the worse for wear because of it. So when you take a bunch of trees, the trees behind it are unhealthy because they've been protected by those trees in front. So there's a good chance like we could potentially lose those trees. And the same to speaking to what my colleague had said, there's a chance you're going to lose those. So yes, they may leave you 2 feet buffer of trees, but they're not going to be healthy. So how do we protect something like that, even though they're leaving the trees? I'm not really saying that they're preserving the trees just because they don't cut them down. Those trees aren't really being preserved because they're going to die a slow death because they're no longer protected by the healthier trees that were in front of them.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of education that needs to go into making these decisions, what constitutes as a quality preserved tree because of its ability to persevere beyond, the life and the maturation of the development. We certainly don't want to see a couple of lone white pines preserved in close proximity to a home when we know that the ability of those to be knocked over in a windstorm is significant. Right. So there's a lot of nuance here. Okay. Speaking more in generalities here, so these criteria are some of the things that we're looking at. We're crediting them on a square footage basis or a planting basis, or assigning a given amount of square footage to that. And then there's a multiplier, and we'll walk through a calculation to see exactly how all of that plays out. But these are some things that we would consider as part of contributing to Green Score. So here's the formula. So enough said, right? You can absorb that. Basically, what we're looking at is it's the amount of landscaping divided by lot area, more or less. So S is the landscape element. Is it a large tree? Is it a lawn? And how big is it? And then it's multiplied by the multiplier. And then we have some bonuses that we're considering, and we're also leaving the bonuses fairly open-ended to use this as a way of incentivizing different community values and goals. Do we want it to be all native species? 50% of irrigation is harvested as rainwater. That's an incredible way of utilizing stormwater. I think that multiplier should be higher. But all these things we need to run through some community input and then speak with some engineers about how realistic is this and how do you reward it with a multiplier that's commensurate with the level of effort it takes to make successful. So we'll utilize this equation shortly, but don't want to.
Is there an example coming up?
Oh, yes.
Oh, thank you. Alderman Jetty.
I'll wait for the example.
Okay. Here's the example. So 10,000 square foot lot area. One of the elements is a rain garden. It's 300 square feet. Its equivalent multiplier is 1.5. 300 times 1.5 is 450. You've got a few shade trees, all told, they equate 2,000 square feet multiplied by the multiplier, and then the bonus for being native species, you get 2,600. And then you have 500 square feet of lawn, multiply it by its multiplier, you get 100. You have this total value of 3,150. Divide that by the lot area, which is 10,000, and you have a green score of 0.315. What does that mean? So green scores are assigned to building types. This is a building type sheet. It has all sorts of characteristics, including heights, all sorts of things that would define the form of the building. Green score is included. In this case, this is a strip commerce development. We've all seen these on Amherst Street and similar areas in the city. This green score is 0.20. So let's walk through an actual real-life example of a recent development. So this is 340 Amherst Street, strip development. This is the landscape plan. I kind of screenshot this out, so I apologize for the quality. The planting plan is there on the, the material list is there on the right. But what that is comes out to 90,000 square feet of lot area, 1 small tree, 14 large trees. Total landscape area at a soil depth of greater than 24 inches is 26,000 square feet. And then a series of plantings that all get their own respective values. So if we then turn around and plug that into the table, these are all the categories that we're getting scored in. You take your landscape area with a soil depth, there's the multiplier of 0.6, total area, you get a value of 22,000. You can see how the math is all done across. Then you come down to total green score value of 30,400 divided by the lot area of 90,000, and that is 0.337. 0.2 was required. This is an interesting lot where it has a large amount of undeveloped space in the back because there's Coleman Brook. So that naturally is going to score a little bit higher because so much of the lot is undeveloped. But that's basically how green score operates. The idea, again, being it's not just trees, there's a lot more to it.
Is there anything here that could encourage pollinator gardens over turf grass, or
Absolutely.
would that be ground covers?
So I think that would be something that we would want to include in a bonus category.
I see.
And so these things all stack, right? So say you have, a green infrastructure swale. So it's turf. There's going to be grass. Maybe it has pollinators. So that's plus 0.1 on the multiplier. You probably have a few trees. Those have a bonus. So you have the whole square footage of the area plus the square footage of all the other landscaped elements into it. So you have a high intensity, green infrastructure that really does a lot for your green score because it's serving so many purposes.
Alderman Clemens.
So what, the score itself, what does that do? So if I
It's-
had 0.37, what is that?
That's what would be considered a good score because it's probably higher than what's required.
But what does that get me as a developer?
So there's going to be a minimum, just as we have minimum landscape requirements now. As we saw in strip development, there's going to be a minimum associated with the building that you're building. So you have to meet that. We're giving you a large menu of options of how you meet that.
Follow up?
Yeah, so remind me, so these are environmental considerations, and when I say environmental, meaning like nature, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
What about things like solar panels and electric car charging stations and things like that, which are also considered green?
So that's more in like the sustainable development section of the code. We do contemplate it. Those do not factor into green score. This is much more of the open space and natural environment part of site development.
Okay.
Alderman Jettie and Alderman Clee.
So I think I understand better. When you first presented this, I thought I heard you say that these would be incentives, but you're actually saying that there's a minimum level that you have to reach, and
Yes.
these are the different ways that you can reach that level, but you've got to come up with the minimum.
Mhm.
You don't get anything more for exceeding the minimum, correct?
Right now, no. There are ways that we could leverage that. And when I say incentives, say you have a really tight lot and you can't possibly fit enough trees to satisfy the green score. Because there's a minimum, you're getting the opportunity to build relatively dense on this lot. You have the opportunity to meet that green score through a more intensely designed piece of green infrastructure, be it a bioswale with multiple elements, rather than just planting a bunch of trees that you simply don't have room for.
And so you gave the example of Tuscan Village and the great thing that they did there. How did that happen? How did they, did they require that, or was it this type of score thing that they suggested and people came up with it? How did that happen?
I don't know exactly. I didn't read through their codes. I did ask a general question about the relationship between the development and the regulatory framework. Which came first? Did they evolve together? Because Tuscan Village is a over a decade-long project. And the answer I got was kind of what I suspected, where there was a general overlay. We want to see something cool happen here. It's a performance overlay, so things that are kind of incentive driven, you have to meet X, Y, and Z to get X, Y, and Z, right? So very similar to the thing that we're doing here, where, and I'm sure that landscaping and how they handle their stormwater was a part of those performance standards, minimum performance that you have to achieve and deliver on to, receive the favorable zoning or conditional use permits associated with the development. I don't know their code that well, so I can't answer with any more detail.
Okay, and so, my thought is that it's been expressed a couple of different times in the committee about encouraging people. You can't come up with a bunch of regulations and nobody's interested in developing because they can't make any money doing it. I understand that. But I also think you need teeth in whatever you come up with, because, I've seen this city develop in a lot of bad ways because builders just took advantage of places where they thought they could get away with things, and they have gotten away with them. Somebody mentioned the stripping all the trees and then planting small saplings in their place. The lack of sidewalks. It's been mentioned in the committee, this payment in lieu of building sidewalks has resulted in our having no sidewalks. A lot of streets were built, and we've spent a lot of money repairing those streets because our regulations were insufficient, and where we didn't enforce whatever regulations we had. We were trying to encourage builders to build houses, and my parents lived in one of those houses. They wouldn't have been able to afford it if the regulations had been too strict. But now the city is spending money fixing the streets, and fixing the sewer systems, and I want to make sure that that we don't in our desire to encourage the free market, the free market has brought, the asbestos industry, the tobacco industry, Exxon Mobil.
The healthcare industry.
The free market has brought a lot of bad stuff. So I understand a desire to encourage, people to do the right thing, but I feel very strongly that, you can't trust people to do the right thing. You have to, I think, make sure that our regulations require that they do the right thing, and then everybody's happy. So, thank you.
Thank you. I have Alderman Clee, Alderman Clemmons, and Alderman Tebow. And just to add to, not just the free market, but the residential markets too. How many times have we bought homes and found something that has been Mickey Moused, or you've rented a place and something's been given the landlord special? I think it's human behavior to cut corners, and the government's there for the betterment and safety. And yes, teeth are helpful from time to time. So, Alderman Clee.
Thank you. My colleague mentioned something that I had a question on, the payment in lieu of, and I do understand the payment in lieu of sidewalks. I do get that, to put a sidewalk when there's no sidewalk and none going to happen with a bunch of homes, that makes sense to have a sidewalk that goes nowhere. It means we have to maintain something that is just not going to go anywhere. I understand that. But I also understand that that payment is supposed to go into a sidewalk fund that is going to help us to build sidewalks maybe in an area that really needs it, maybe along West Hollis or something like that. Having said that, why would we do a payment in lieu of, and I think you mentioned it earlier, that there's no place to put any green, but where will those monies go? And what would be the purpose of those monies? That's my question, my first question.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
didn't, all right.
I'm gonna stop at that, and then I'll go to
Very
the
good.
other one.
All right, I'll paint a scenario I experienced in another community that we brought this up. Car dealerships, large, paved, expanses of property. They don't want trees dropping leaves and acorns on their new cars. Okay, there's a rational reason, market-based, why they wouldn't want the trees and therefore probably couldn't meet green score. We're providing an opportunity for a payment in lieu, which isn't just an automatic, you get it. You'd have to go through a conditional use permit. So the planning board would be able to say, no, you don't get to go for a payment in lieu. You have to meet your green score. In this situation where there's a reason why it would make sense to allow the payment in lieu, what I'd be proposing is we set up, basically you could call it an urban canopy tree fund or something like that, where we have a fund where these payment in lieu dollars go. And I've seen them deployed in other communities in various ways where, it goes into when there's road redevelopment or anytime there's a city project that requires landscaping. It helps to augment those landscaping plans and deliver more, potentially some green infrastructure improvements along roadways. Like a street tree fund, like a partnership fund with residences, where a residence could opt to have a tree planted on their property, and either they will then either use all the money and pay for the tree itself and the installation using the fund, or they buy the tree and then the city uses the fund to pay for the installation. There's a partnership that could happen there. Basically, we want to see these dollars that we collect directly going into the creation of additional landscaping elsewhere in the city. And we can collect it at a rate where, it really could be delivered on a one-to-one basis. That's not occurring with sidewalks, as you well know. So that would be something that we would explore. But again, I want to stress that it's not an automatic thing. You would have to demonstrate a reason why you are opting into the payment in lieu.
And I'd like to see the plan as to where it's going to go. And I have one more question, if I may. The other question is, when we listed the green score and I talked about the trees, another thing came to my head, the plantings. Would there be a requirement that they have to maintain those plantings? Because I heard you say something about pollinators and so on. You could have a bad winter and those pollinator plants could die. Is there a requirement, because developers walk away, so is there a requirement that those plantings and things like that have to be maintained for 5 years, 10 years?
Yep.
Forever?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's my question.
So there's, yes, and there's a few ways that we're playing with potentially enforcing that. So yes, we can say, minimum performance period of 5 years. I believe we currently have one that's a year. Not enough. You could have one cycle, a seasonal cycle, and then the tree dies off. Look at some of the trees that are planted along the Veterans Memorial Parkway. You can see while they have leaves, there's bark that's peeling off the trunk, and you just know they're not going to last. We can hold a landscape bond. We currently do when a project is seeking a certificate of occupancy and it's November. Well, they're not going to plant their required landscaping in November, but we're going to grant them the COs because people need to move in, but then we're going to hold that landscaping bond until the landscaping is installed, by summer of the following year. We could potentially hold a percentage of that bond for the duration of a 5-year performance period, and then if anything dies or isn't installed, or we can pull that bond to then have the city install the landscaping, and then we would obviously need to reserve easement rights to do that. All sorts of there are everything that we would have to do to ensure that we have the ability to do that as part of the performance guarantee of the site plan approval. We would make sure that is scoped out within probably the site plan regulations, as that's really where that would be most appropriately located within the land use code.
Hey,
Of course, yes.
the reason I asked that question was I used to live in Canongate, and you talk about the glass building and the vacuum building and so on. When they put the vacuum building in, one of the agreements were they were going to build a buffer of so-called trees. The people at Canongate were too naive to know enough to say what the height was and the maintenance of them. They were too short, number one, and number two is almost all of them died within a year. And there was no recourse because they didn't take that time. So that's why, to me, plantings are extraordinarily important to make sure that does happen. So, thank you.
Great. Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So can you clarify, is this would just be for commercial properties, or is this residential properties as well?
Yes.
So if I'm a homeowner, I would have to meet this requirement if I wanted to add something to my house, like an addition to my house, or?
No, that's one of the thresholds that we're still fleshing out. Typically, if there's, say you build a rear wing and it's going to be an ADU, that would not trigger compliance with the green score. I would imagine in most cases, a lot of the residential lots, R75 and above, already comply with green score just because trees exist. Areas like the tree streets that are more developed and very ironically called the tree streets, where they're pretty devoid of significant landscaping, those are instances where at a certain level of reinvestment into the property, this would trip. And whether that's 50% of assessed value, 100% of assessed value, we're still playing with that. And then also, do you have space on the property to do that? Do you now need to make a payment in lieu? Things like that. Yeah.
Follow up.
Yeah, that's fine with me, what you said. I would like a carve out, in my opinion, that in the event of a disaster where somebody is rebuilding, this is waived.
I see. Okay.
So your house burns down, there's a major flood, something like that, right? Where it's a total loss because of a natural disaster, or even arson, a man-made disaster that's not your fault.
Act of God.
I think we need to waive this requirement in those cases, because again, that's a traumatic situation
Yeah.
that we should be helping the person get through.
It's reasonable.
I agree.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you. So I guess hearing the conversation, what problem is this solving?
So we have heard a lot about lack of green space. And when we press the residents, the community on that, what is green space? I think we've talked a little bit tonight about this. It can take many shapes and sizes and appearances. It can be an entire park. It can also just be a tree on the corner. It can be, just a little bit of green here and there. Walking through the tree streets, because it's near City Hall, I walk through it fairly often in the summertime, and it really is somewhat depressing at how little landscaping there is. And so, we can go down the rabbit hole of the benefits of trees in an urban environment, heat island effects, some wildlife, trees make people happy. It's just, there are all of these fringe benefits associated with site landscaping that, quite frankly, when I first got here, our landscaping regulations were not being enforced. My staff have given me a nickname that I won't repeat, given it's politically insensitive, relative to my enforcement of our landscape regulations. I doggedly enforce and encourage my staff to review the landscape plans and not only ensure that the tree counts are accurate, like go type in that Latin name of that planting into the search engine and see if it's hardy in zone 5. Really getting an understanding of the benefits of the landscaping, ensuring that it actually can survive in this environment, and then pushing back on the engineers when we don't have compliant landscaping. And I'm happy to say that we're seeing more trees being planted because of that, and I think that generally results in just better development. And so, having spent time in areas where we don't have a lot of landscaping, and then seeing this new development come online, and there are a lot of trees being planted, I think that's good. And it does also add curb appeal to properties and increases land values as well.
Okay. If I can just editorialize, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this section, to be completely honest with you. I want to think about it more, but it's different. Are there communities in the area doing this?
Yes, Green Score is actually a recognized approach to regulating landscaping. It is more sophisticated than just tree per 40 feet of linear frontage. And again, the idea is to scale the landscaping and the services it provides appropriately to the level of development and offer options to the private market.
I guess I would like to hear how this has worked in other communities.
I will try and pull some information for you.
Thank you.
Alderman Cleveland. Do you mind if
No,
Alderman
please.
Keel goes?
Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll support you, Sam. I think it's a good idea to have green score. I think it's creative, although it sounds like they do it other places, so it's not to take it away from you. You didn't come up with it, obviously, but as far as bringing it here, I think it's a good idea. I agree with Alderman Clemens about the burning down of the house, and to the point of residential. Most residential has green space that's going to qualify already, with the exception of stuff like you said, downtown, that's just the way it was built. There were trees there, in Alderman Jetty's day, there were trees there down the street. That's why they called them tree streets, right? But but most, the outlying areas that have houses are all going to have enough green space to qualify for this. Not worried, but trying to get people to develop businesses that have those little green spaces. If you go to places where you got a nice little setup, maybe some kind of outdoor mall type thing, and they have little green spaces and trees, it looks nicer, it feels better, you feel more like being there instead of going to, strip mall, Market Basket, Hobby Lobby there, where it's just urban, right, and no green space. So I think it's a good idea. I'd like to see, how it works in actual working mode to see how it does. But, and I wonder how do you think, I guess I'll ask a question. How do you think businesses respond to this? Because obviously places in other areas, like to Alderman Govea's question,
Yeah.
have had to deal with it in other places that do it. How do developers feel about having a green score?
So I think, all right, so on the face of it, like green score, new way of calculating landscape requirements. Change. Oh no, not good, right? I pulled this example because this is something we see a lot on Amherst Street, strip redevelopment. Okay, this is an actually approved landscape plan. Where does it fall under this? And with 0.2 required, and this is delivering 0.33, clearly the green score is not out of step with what we're already requiring. It's just a new way of looking at it. And it's all very easy to calculate within, a CAD program. And we're just gonna have to provide guidance on, the tabulations associated with proving your green score. Very easy for engineers to do. And hopefully it results in some new creative ways of handling stormwater on site and, stacking ecosystem services within intentional design landscaping.
Alderman Govea. Oh, did you have?
No, I'm good.
I'm
good.
sorry.
I'm good.
Alderman
No,
Clee.
no, I'll-
Sorry, I just wanted to follow
No,
up
please,
quickly,
by all
if
means,
that's okay.
by all means, you're a member.
So I guess to that point, I would be interested to see if this is something we could do of plans in, I don't know, either the last few months, 6 months, a year, whatever it might be. How many of those plans would have passed with this green score requirement compared to what we're currently doing?
Yeah.
And how that would stack up? Because I mean, if we're noticing most people are already going above what that requirement would be, then I don't really see it being a huge problem. But if we're noticing like 90% of applicants wouldn't have hit that green score, then I would probably start questioning a little bit more of where we're going with it. So I think to see the application in other municipalities, other towns, and then seeing how that would rank up against what we're seeing here in the city being proposed already would be a good analysis to have.
I will have to strike a delicate balance between you and Alderman Jettie.
Before I move on to Alderman Clee, I don't know if it's true. I'm just thinking of my own experience going to other states to visit, but would Florida have a lot of zoning like this? Because every time I go through Florida, the green space, I always feel like it's always perfect. There's always the palm tree in the right spot in the middle of a developed area. I don't.
The climate is changing, so
Yes.
it's getting warmer up here, so we should.
Yeah, we should get the palm.
We should have some palm trees, yes.
It just seems so welcoming with their green space. I'm not sure if that it's zoned that way or it's just the atmosphere of that state.
It's not a Dillon state.
It's not, of course. Yes, every town can do what they want. That's right. All right, Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a very specific question when you're talking about the green space and when you talk about residential area. When we all think of green space, we think of literally the color green. We think of grass, we think of trees, we think of plantings. I have a neighbor that did a creative landscaping, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. They took up all their grass, front and back, and did rocks. There's a couple of plantings here and there and one tree. Would that be, where they have no grass at all, none, would that meet something of this nature? I mean, they did multiple layers. It's very permeable. I mean, the rain falls within it. It doesn't, if there's no runoff, I mean, it's permeable, so.
Yeah, quite possibly. So they would get, like I was saying, this all stacks.
It's beautiful.
So you have plantings on top of mulched beds or grass, plantings on top of inorganic surface materials, so rocks are organic, but they're not living, so we'll say that's not qualifying. So while they're not getting the credit for the ground cover, they're still getting credit for all of the plantings. And by the way you describe it, it sounds like they would absolutely, front and back, and
Yeah.
it sounds like they would absolutely meet it, and there'd be no problem.
It's truly beautiful. They don't have a whole lot of plants there because they put potted plants, so they can change it as the season goes. But it's gorgeous. It's very unique to the neighborhood.
And we may even
And they don't
look-
have to mow the lawn. I'm so envious. I'm so envious.
And that may even qualify under, the soils segment there, where it's, stone is, it's not paving, but it's permeable.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
very,
right.
they don't get any runoff or anything else like that, so it's,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I said, when I'm mowing my lawn and swearing under my breath, looking over at theirs going, damn. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous, so it is.
Yep.
Thank you.
No further questions, it looks like. Do you have more to present? Or
I do not.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been very exciting, and exciting because I'm a nerd, and I find things like this exciting. But we'll look forward to seeing you back on the 29th. Thank you. Right. Communications,
There's none.
petitions,
None.
unfinished business,
There's none.
new business resolutions,
None.
new business ordinances,
None.
tabling committee,
None.
general discussion. Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, so I just have a question, Mr. Durfee. Some of us, our terms will be ending at the end of the year. Do you anticipate trying to get this passed before the end of the term?
No. We would have liked to. In fact, I have a calendar reminder today, that today would have been the filing deadline to submit it for first reading and get it all run its course before Thanksgiving. We, I think, would be overly ambitious to do that. Unfortunately, I think my poor planning on deciding on when we would try to have a second child coincided rather inconveniently with the adoption timeline relative to the election cycle. My apologies. But we have also, with the publishing of the draft, the level of community engagement and these sessions as well that we continue to do, and also the conversations we have with prospective developers, it's given us so much actionable intelligence on ways we need to tweak the draft code that it would not do us from the administrative perspective, I think you all from the political perspective, developers from the market perspective, and residents from the community goals perspective, justice in terms of delivering a quality product simply for the purpose of getting it adopted before the term ends. We thought long and hard about this. We have put in a lot of effort with the current slate of aldermen. There has been a lot of education that's gone into this, and while some of that will be lost with some turnover of the board, which that's just part of the process. And again, it's as much as we would like to have this adopted soon, it's not something we want to rush and then look back and say, we probably should have spent more time with the community. We probably should have answered more questions or sought more input.
Well, I look forward to myself and Alderman Jettie speaking at public comment when this comes forth to the next board.
So, the ordinance will not be introduced this term because it wouldn't
Would expire.
it wouldn't get past this term,
Exactly.
and it would. So it would. I forget what the technical term is, but it wouldn't survive. So it would have to be taken up by the new board.
Yep.
Unfortunate, because I think I've asked that a bunch of times, but you don't want to get it. You want to get it right, and we've started that process for sure on the political side, and Manager Durfee and Director Sullivan and his team have started it well before us to get it technically right. Technical versus political. Any further discussion? No? All right. Public comment, I don't see anyone. Remarks by Alderman. I guess we have a second bite at the apple. I'll just add one small thing that, I was disappointed to read. I wasn't present at the Special Board of Aldermen to hear the presentations on Elm Street, and I was disappointed to read the public minutes of that presentation. And I plan on writing about it in a future op-ed, and I'll leave it at that for now. But, all right, Alderman Govea.
I move to adjourn.
Motion's in order, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? and we are adjourned at 8:54 PM.